hearty welcome to Jnanarjane, Empowering Excellence. Friends, today's Wednesday study circle. We have selected an interesting and important topic for those who are into GST practice. So important practical case studies under GST law. To impart knowledge on this, we have a passionate GST expert, CA Annapurna Kabra is with us. On behalf of Bangalore branch and on behalf of all the participants here, hearty welcome to CA Annapurna Kabra.
Thank you.
Hearty welcome, ma'am.
Thank you.
Friends, I'll just take a minute or two inform about our branch upcoming programs. Tomorrow, we have arranged 6 days international taxation workshop. It is commencing from tomorrow till 26th, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. 26th Saturday is going to be a full day session. Otherwise, it is 4 to 7 every day, 5 days, 3 hours, total of 21 hours of learning from tomorrow till 26th. 21st June is International Yoga Day. Your branch is hosting a yoga day program early morning 7:30 to 9. I request you along with your family members, please join that program. An expert, a celebrity yoga trainer, Dr. Naveen K. Vishweshwaraya is going to enlighten us about yoga's benefits and various other things. Along with his team, they are going to do a 45 minutes of practical yoga training also. I request all of you to join along with your family members on 21st June morning 7:30 to 9. After that, you can go office. Hopefully, unlock will happen on 21st. I request all of you to join and request make your family members also to join and understand our own tradition yoga. It is a yoga International Yoga Day is 21st June, friends. 27th June is International MSME Day. 27th June International MSME Day. Your branch is conducting a celebrating, in fact, MSME Day along with Peenya Industries Association. So evening 3 o'clock, the program starts till 5:50, 3 p.m. to 5:15. 27th June is a Sunday. So evening 3 p.m. So our Honorable Minister for Industries, Large and Medium Industries of Government of Karnataka, Mr. Jagadish Shettar is going to inaugurate that program on 27th. I request all of you need to join, plus also inform your clients, industry members also. You please inform your clients, all those industry members, they can join. It is going to be a live webcast. So link also you will get 2 hours of CPE too. So you can understand the Bangalore branch is conducting, informing the industry members what all the value addition a chartered accountant can do, informing other incentives available for MSME also going to be enlightened on that day. I request all the members you join, also make your clients join on that day on 27th of June, International MSME Day. July 1st is going to be our day, CA Day. Your branch is hosting a very, very interesting program, starting morning with the flag hoisting and students entertainment program. Evening, there will be a panel discussion with the leading panelist till 4 to 7 p.m. Please look into bangaloreci.org and register for all these special programs in addition to tomorrow's International Taxation Workshop for 6 days. With that note, hearty welcome to each one of you friends. Over to Divya.
Thank you, Chairman. A very pleasant good evening to all the participants and to our speaker and to our Chairman sir also. To give a brief introduction about us today's speaker, we have C. Annapurna D. Kabra with us. She is a fellow member of Institute of Chartered Accountants of India and has completed her DISA and DIRM course conducted by ICAI. She has contributed various articles on VAT and GST, and she is regular contributors of articles to various professional journals, including Bangalore branch of SIRC of ICA, KSCA, many other professional bodies. She is also faculty to the GST certification course conducted by ICA. She is member of Bangalore study group of ICA. She is also committee member for development of study module for Karnataka commercial VAT officers, and she is regular faculty to Fiscal Policy Institute. With this very brief introduction, I welcome you for today's programs, ma'am. Hearty welcome, ma'am, once again.
Thank you so much.
ma'am.
Thank you, sir. I think this is the first study circle meet we are having after during this pandemic time. Am I right? In this
Every Wednesday we are having 6 to 8.
Yeah.
No break.
No break. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. So first of all, I thank Bangalore branch of ICI for giving me an opportunity to share some few insights on the topic of practical case studies under the GST law. And I think from last, it's already been a 3 year where the GST law has been introduced, and it is in progress. A lot of amendments are happening frequently. And the intention of selecting this topic was to throw some insights with reference to the amendment, which is yet to be notified, and also the practical issues which we are facing in day-to-day proceedings while dealing with our client, or while dealing with the department, or while reading the sections. So with that background, we thought, let us discuss on this topic. And before this, I thought I'll spend some few minutes on this Kara Samadhana scheme and some commercial taxes amendment. Some around 10 to 15 minutes, I'll just throw upon some important points, so that if any of you are fitting into that scheme, you can just analyze it and you can just think of applying for that scheme actually. So that was the intention before starting on this practical case studies. And we'll be discussing a lot of practical scenarios, lot of practical issues under the GST. And if any of the members has any specific issues, you can just put it in the chat box. We will just discuss on that aspect also. And while we are discussing case study, if any members would like to do some value additions or want to throw upon your views on that, you are most welcome to participate in this event, because this is more on practical basis. So it is not something we are just reading what is there in the law. We'll analyze from the different aspects and we'll try to analyze the case study. So with that background, hope I request all the members to participate actively. I know it is virtual, but let us try to do our best through virtually by interacting on this case studies. And if any specific, I think you can mute yourself and you can discuss on those aspects also. So with this, let me start my presentation. Is it visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, thank you. Yes, so before on this topic, I thought I think most of the members are aware that there is a scheme which has been introduced in March 2021. And I think this is the fourth time they are introducing in last 4 to 5 years. And this is a second time where they are introducing the scheme in such a manner that even if the orders are passed after the introduction of the scheme, even for those type of orders, the benefit of Kara Samadhana scheme is given. So basically, I think the intention of this scheme is they want to close the litigations. They want to weigh off they want to give the benefits, and they want to weigh off the penalties and interest. So that is the intention of introducing this Kara Samadhana scheme. This is only from the perspective of commercial taxes like VAT, CST taxes, or any professional taxes dues are there, or any luxury taxes dues are there, or any agriculture income tax, or any entertainment taxes or entry tax. So any of the old pending cases are pending, or if any issues are there, or any proceedings are going on under the commercial taxes, you can just look into this notification and you can analyze whether you can apply for this scheme actually. And basically, you have to see that when you're applying for this scheme, you have to see that the assessment orders or any reassessment order or any rectification order, whatever is in your on the basis of which you want to plan to apply for Kara Samadhana scheme, that you have to see that those orders should be dated prior to 31/7/2021. So if you have order, say now, if you have received any order, say in April or in March 2021, and you want to apply for this scheme, if it is prior to 31/7/2021, you can think of applying for this scheme. Then payment of tax dues. So it is not that immediately when you apply, you have to make a payment. They have given the time limit up to 31st October 2021. And in case there is no arrears of taxes, then they can waive off your penalty and interest as which is levied in your order. For example, there is a CST order which they have issued, and where the CST order is issued, based on that you have not received any statutory forms. Now you are not very clear whether you are going to receive the statutory forms or not. So in that case, you can wait till 31st/7 to check whether any statutory forms you are going to receive. If you are not going to receive, and if you don't think that you will receive, you can think of this by paying the taxes, and you can you can get the waiver of interest and penalty under the respective act. But the payment of the taxes, whatever is there, that has to be paid prior to 31st October 2021. And penalty for non-filing of returns and VAT 240. You might find some dealers who have not registered where they were liable, who have not filed their returns, or who have not filed VAT 240 for the respective periods. So in that case also, many times the assessees are receiving the notice that you have not filed your returns, or you have not filed your VAT 240. Generally, most of them are receiving the notices and saying that you have not filed VAT 240. So in that case, by applying under this scheme, you can file your VAT 240 and you can pay the taxes, but you can, whatever the interest is there and penalty will be applicable, that you can get waiver of that. So that is one, you have to pay the taxes, whatever the interest, any interest liability or penalty, you can get waiver. So I think even if you have received the notice under VAT 240, you can apply for, you can file the VAT 240 and you can get a waiver of interest and penalty under 72, 1B and 74. No waiver of penalty. Please remember, if you receive any order under 10A of CST Act, then you will not get any waiver of penalty. So that one, other than that, you will get all other waiver of penalties. Withdrawal of appeal. If you have any cases which is pending before Joint Commissioner Appeal, or if any case is pending before Karnataka Appellate Authority. So in that case, if you want to apply for the scheme, then first you have to make an application to the Appellate Authority for withdrawing the appeal. And once you have withdrawn the appeal, then only you can file applications for the waiver of interest and penalty in Annexure 1. And accordingly, they will, and please remember, this application should be filed for each respective year. For example, if you have appeal to Appellate Authority for 3 years, then you have to make a withdrawal letter for 3 years and make an application to the scheme for respective in different years. So not one application for all 3 years. You have to make a separate application for each respective year. That is what you have to remember. Amount paid at the time of appeal. As you all know, under KVAT Act or under Karnataka Entry Tax Act, if you have to file the appeal, you have to deposit 30% of your disputed liability. That is your tax, interest and penalty. And balance 70%, you will either go with the bank guarantee or you'll go for stay of those taxes. Now the issue is, for example, if you have already paid 30% taxes, disputed liability, whether it is taxes, interest or penalty, whether that can be adjusted with the full taxes. So that is what they have stated in the scheme, saying that if you have paid any amount at the time of filing the appeal or other application, it is eligible for adjustment towards the arrears of tax outstanding for the assessment year for which benefit is claimed. So for example, out of 1,30,000 you have already paid. So that 30, and you have the tax liability of say 50,000. So you can adjust this 30,000 against that, though that 30,000 includes the component of interest or penalty. Yes. Any doubt, you can just put it in chat box. And if you have refund of interest and penalty already paid before, for example, I have, there was an assessment order which is passed in March 2021 or February 2021, and I have paid against that amount. I did not go for appeal. I have paid those taxes, interest and penalty. Now the issue is whether I can take the refund of those interest and penalty which already I have paid against that respective assessment order. So they have very clearly said that you are not eligible for the refund of taxes of penalty or interest which you have already paid against the respective order. Can dealer file appeal after opting for the scheme? Please remember, once you have opted for Samadhana scheme, there will be no further proceedings from the department, and even you don't have the option for doing any further proceedings. So you have to be very careful when you're applying for the scheme. If it is rejected, or if by any reason, if something goes against your order, then you cannot file the appeal or other applications before the appellate authority or court, or you cannot seek any rectification of order. So whatever application is filed and whatever has been accepted, that will be full and final. So that they are made very clear that against this Kara Samadhana scheme order, you cannot proceed for any higher authorities. And not eligible for the scheme. There are certain cases where you are not eligible for scheme. For example, if you have filed an appeal, and against that, if the state has filed the appeal before Karnataka Appellate Authority or CST Appellate Authority, or where state has filed any applications against your order to High Court or Supreme Court, then in that case, you cannot file you are not eligible for this Karad Samadhana scheme. And they have specified, there is a website, you have to go to that respective website, and you have to link to those respective, it is self-explanatory. And if you want to make application under Karnataka sales tax or CST tax, then you have to make it under Annexure 1. And if you want to make under VAT and CST, you have to apply in Annexure 1A. And under entry tax or professional tax or luxury tax, all this you have to make it in Annexure 1B. And if you want to make application under Karnataka entertainment tax, you have to make it in IC. And specific penalties, what has been specified for VAT 240 and all other cases, that has to be filed in Annexure 1D. So they have made a separate format for each kind of act and each kind of scenarios. So accordingly, be careful on that, and please read it properly and then apply for the scheme. And very important is, after you make an application, so the department will verify your applications. They will read out your supporting documents, and accordingly, they will pass the order. And after verifications and passing the order, then you will get to know whether you have got the benefit of the scheme or not. So, and please remember, even in many cases, there is a scrutiny of your transactions. So in case if you were not registered, but department has assessed you, and even though you were unregistered, they have assessed you and levied the taxes, interest and penalty. Even in those cases also, you can enjoy the scheme under the Kara Samadhana scheme. So basically, we have to remember that if in all these scenarios, they are eligible to enjoy the benefit. So the scheme is very, very, I think if you want to save your litigation cost, or if you want to avoid all the future litigations, or if you want to, depending upon the facts of your case and depending upon the decision which you are looking into that, accordingly you can decide for this. Because if there is a huge interest and penalty, I think it will waive off all your interest and penalties, and you will be liable only to pay the taxes. So even in many cases, if the matter is remanded to the assessing authority, or if the matter is remanded to the other authority also, even in that case also, you can apply for this scheme. So this is some brief, I know I'm not taken in detail, I'm just touching upon the important points so that you can look into this. And just there is a certain extensions of dates for filing your returns, because many times we are just looking because of pandemic, and a lot of extensions are happening for a lot of compliances under the respective laws. So even under the old commercial tax laws also, they have made certain extensions. So just for the benefit of members, I've just highlighted based on the notifications, whatever has been issued very recently. So professional tax, they have said pertaining to April, you can file up to June 21. And any professional taxes, whatever you are liable to pay, which you are supposed to pay by 30th May, that has been extended to 30th June 2021. And any professional tax as an employer who enrolled before commencement of year, specific to 21-22, they are liable to pay within 1 month from the date of enrollment. So for them, there is no specific extension. And for entry tax also, there are certain assessments which are going on under the respective year. So whatever the assessment they have specified under the respective sections, like 5D, 6, 7, 21, whatever it is, And whatever this commissioner appeal which are filed between 1/10/20 to 31/12/20, all this, there is a time limit which has been specified in Karnataka Anti-Tax. So now there is a further extension of 90 days. So that is what we have to remember. Like if it is a 5 years after the end of the tax period, because of this pandemic, they have extended the limitation time of 5 years and 3 months. So ultimately there is an extension of around 90 days or 3 months for doing this assessment or filing the appeal. And even if the time limit to file the appeal to appellate tribunal also for the order dated between 1st October 20 to 31st December 20, it was 60 days, and further with the condemnation of delay of 180 days. Now they have made 60 days plus 270 days. So approximately we can see that there is an extension of 9 months or 3 months, 90 days or 3 months. So even for rectifications, revisions, there is a further extension of 3 months. And for Karnataka VAT also, they have made a similar extension. It was like wherever it is 5 years, they have made it as 5 years, 3 months. Wherever it is 8 years, they have made it as 8 years, 3 months. So whatever the orders are there with for when you're looking for the limitation, you just count further 90 days or 3 months as the case may be. So I have bifurcated in this to what extent you are getting. In some cases, it is on basis of days, and in some scenarios, it is based on number of months. So accordingly, just look into those aspects and you can look how much time they have expanded. So majorly it is 3 months or 90 days. Yes. So with this, I think I've taken 10 minutes, 15 minutes for this. Let us now go to the case studies under the GST law. So the first very interesting issue, I thought let us just discuss on this. Krishna Limited, I'm just reading to analyze from your perspective also. Krishna Limited is a company incorporated under the Companies Act. As per the Companies Act, it has to spend a specific amount of profits towards corporate social responsibility activities. Accordingly, in furtherance of its CSR obligations, it incurred expenses worth ₹2 crores in relation to training to semi-skilled trainees, which are enrolled with NGO. So they have an agreement with the NGO for training of their employees. Now, these expenses were towards providing proper uniforms, equipment, tools to the trainees for skill development training. Whether Krishna Limited is eligible to avail and utilize ITC towards expenses incurred in the course or furtherance of business. Now, once we have understood this fact, the first thing we have to understand is whether they have any agreement with the NGO, like this company Krishna Limited has any CSR agreement with the NGO. So first of all, we have to analyze the clauses of the agreement. Is it a statutory obligations, or is it a regular commercial contract? So if it is under the corporate social responsibility, if it fit into that, then you can call it as a statutory obligations. So in that case, if you have appointed a trainer, for example, I have appointed an NGO to train the trainees so that to develop them for the skill development. And this is also called as, this is also fit into CSR activity. So in that case, from the GST perspective, whatever the taxes I'm going to pay to that NGO or to the trainer, or whatever the expenses I'm going to incur for this uniforms or tools for training these employees, whether I can take the credit, whether the Krishna Limited can take a credit under the GST law. So first of all, we are analyzing what is the clauses mentioned in the CSR agreement. Then looking that, yes, it is fitting into the CSR agreement, whether it is a statutory obligation. Yes, if it is a statutory obligation, then we have to say whether it is in the course of furtherance of business. So ultimately, if you look at the definition of business, it is quite wider and it is covering even this kind of activities. Now, looking from the perspective of input tax credit, section 16 is very clear that expenses incurred in the course or furtherance of business. So now, whatever the expenses I'm incurring, this around 2 crores I have incurred, whether I'm eligible to take credit of that 2 crore, whatever taxes I have paid on those 2 crore. So what it can be presumed that it is a expenditure which is incurred in the course or furtherance of business. There is no output. I am incurring these expenses as a part of corporate social responsibility. So I will be paying the amount to the NGO also. So NGO will charge the tax to me, and whether I can take the credit. Now, when we are looking section 17 subsection 1, which states that input tax credit pertaining to the business is eligible, input tax credit pertaining to the non-business is ineligible. So in that case, when we are saying that it is in the course or furtherance of business, so we are not fitting into the section 17 subsection 1 as ineligible. It will be an eligible credit because it is used in the course of business. Now we have to look section 17 subsection 5, which pertains to the block credit. So even there is no such restrictions which has been given in section 17 subsection 5 saying that it is the expenses incurred for CSR are not eligible. So there is no such specific restriction. So analyzing all the sections, analyzing section 16, analyzing 17 subsection 1 or analyzing 17 subsection 5 or any sections with looking into the facts as given, according to what I believe is that they are eligible to avail and utilize the input tax credit pertaining to these expenses. So I think I'm very clear on that. Anybody has anything, please put your query on the chat box because I'll be proceeding to the next because we are covering certain case studies. So I want, if you have anything, you can please put into the chat box. Audio is not clear. I'm just getting a message. Audio is not clear. Can anybody confirm it? It's clear. Okay, thank you. So
Little
this
low,
is,
ma'am.
yes.
Can
Okay.
increase the volume.
Now is it okay? Hello?
Yeah, it is much better now.
Yeah, it's much better. Okay, thank you. So I think you were able to hear this case study, Radhakrishna sir. You're able to hear or shall I repeat it? So I think this basically case study we are talking on input tax credit which are incurred for input services or inputs which are incurred for corporate social responsibility obligations. So we are looking from the GST perspective whether we are eligible to avail the input tax credit for the expenses incurred for towards corporate social responsibility. Can tomorrow the department says that there is no output, there is no outward supply, so this input tax credit should not be allowed. So looking into the aspects of section as provided and seeing that CSR is also whatever the response, it is a social obligations. So it is in the course or furtherance of business. So according to our view or according to my view, I believe that it is eligible and it is used in the course or furtherance of business. So this is the first case study. If it is a partnership firm incurs CSR expenses, can they take ITC where it is not a statutory obligations? One more question has been put by Vinayaka saying that if it is a partnership firm. So I think in that case, we don't call it as a corporate social responsibility. It is something you want to give it as a donation or you want to incur certain expenses for your development. In that case also, I can say that yes, it is in the course or furtherance of business, but there is a possibility that it is not a statutory obligations. Then there is a possibility that there is no outward supply, or if it is, you are not able to link that with your business. For example, this expenses, whatever, I am presuming this Krishna Limited is not a company. Krishna Limited is a partnership firm. So in that case, if I am expending these expenses for training this training, and if I'm going to use this training in my business, then I can say that yes, it is in the course of my business and accordingly I can take a credit. But or I'm training my employees. So that way, if I am able to link it, then in that scenario, I believe that you can take the credit. Otherwise, if you're just incurring, if you're giving a donation to other entities, then I think you may not be eligible to take credit unless you're able to link with your business. The expenses is pertaining to staff for their improvement. It is similar to staff welfare, but the same is not eligible for input tax credit. Why there is a difference? Please understand, see, it's not that all staff welfare are disallowed. It is not like that. Please remember, there are certain expenses which the specifically 17 subsection 5 you have to look into. For example, they have specified insurance or they have specified transportations, they have specified motor vehicles. So there are certain expenses which specifically law itself has blocked it under 17.5. Like for example, if you're selling a food to employees, they are saying that you cannot take the credit for that. So there are certain restrictions which has been specified in 17 subsection 5. So I think you have to link with the 17 subsection 5. If it is blocked, then it is not eligible. If it is not blocked, you are eligible. So I think I'm clear. The expenses is pertaining to staff for their improvement. I agree. It is a training expenses. It is something which you are incurring the expenses which is used in the course of your business. You are eligible subject to blocking of credit. Otherwise, you are not eligible. So ultimately, what I'm saying is, whenever you're going to analyze this kind of expenses which are you are entering, many times we have a contract with certain institute saying that you please train our employees on, say, certain Excel, or you can call something to train on the office culture or personality development or handwriting, something you want to train your employees. So you have appointed a trainer and they're training. So if it is in the course of your business and if it is not restricted, as it is not restricted in 17 subsection 5, you are eligible to credit because you are using for the development of your employees. So in that case, you are eligible. So you have to just check 17 subsection 5 where they have made specific restriction for certain expenses. If it is fitting into that, you are not eligible. But if it is not fitting into that, you are eligible according to my view. Yes, am I clear, Vinayak? I think this is from Raj Gopal. Yes. Is there anything? Any other chat? I'll proceed for the next case then. So hope we are clear that yes, we are eligible to the extent of statutory obligation to the extent of used for CSR responsibilities. Now the next is, this is also certain common issue. Which
Madam, still your voice is little low. Can you please increase it, or microphone you need to?
Now am I audible, sir?
Yes, much better now.
Much better. Oh, I think earphone issue was. Okay, now let us go to the case study 2, where we are discussing on second issue where Radha and Associates has rented the property for commercial use to XYZ Limited. I've taken simple case studies for the understanding, and then they have collected 5 lakh as a rent per month plus taxes, and they have also deducting the property tax of 5,000 per month. And they have also collected the security deposits of 50 lakhs from the recipient. Now the issue is, whatever the rent you are collecting, yes, it is fitting into the schedule 2, and it is a supply of goods and service. It is a service, so there is a levy of tax. So on the rent, there is no issues. There is a levy of taxes. Now the issue is whether you can take a deduction of property tax from the rent, because under the service tax law, we had a specific notification for the deduction of property tax from the renting value. But whether that similar deduction is there under the GST law. So I think if you analyze section, because we don't have any specific notification for the deduction of property tax under the GST law. But when we look section 15 for the valuation aspects, they have said all any other levies, taxes, but they have given the deduction only for the taxes as specified under the GST Act, like CGST, IGST or SGST. But there is no specific statutory levies which has been given as a deductions from your value. So based on that section 15, subsection 5, and analyzing the valuation rules, according to me, you will not get any deductions for the property taxes. Now the next issue is, I have in many scenarios, we are seeing that they are collecting huge deposits and they are making it as a nominal value of rent. For example, 50 lakhs I'm collecting as a security deposit and some 50,000 I'm charging as a rent. So what we have to see that, is it whatever the notional interest you are going to collect on, you are going to earn on that 50 lakhs, whether the department can say, or whether the law is allowing, laying that, yes, there might be a levy of tax on notional interest. Because I'm collecting a huge amount of deposits, but I'm collecting a very nominal amount of rent. Or so how you will decide it is nominal, or how you will decide that it is excess security deposits. So I think you have to look into the market standard or industry standard. So in that area, what is the rent? For example, there are 2 industries located around. In one industry, you will find the 5,000, the other industry is giving around 15,000. So if there is a huge variations in the rent between the in the specific locations or in the specific scenarios, you have to analyze. I know there are the other factors also which you have to look when you're looking renting. But if there is a huge variance between the industry standard and the rent what you're collecting, then there is a possibility that they can look into the valuation rules under section 15, saying that price is not the sole consideration. And there is a possibility that they can levy the taxes even on notional interest. Otherwise, this issue was raised even in Karnataka advanced ruling in Midcon Polymers Private Limited also. So very clearly they have clarified that there cannot be any GST taxes on this notional interest, and there is no deduction for property taxes. But from the analyzing perspective from the GST, what I think I'm saying, these advanced rulings are binding only to the respective applicant. It is not binding to all the registered person. But we can get the reading of the law, we can analyze the law. But what I am saying is we have to look into those aspects also. And if it is beyond the industry standard, there is a risk of levying the taxes even on notional interest. Otherwise, there is no such taxes on notional interest. It is only a deposit. And if you read the definition of consideration, they have excluded the deposit unless it is appropriated to a specific supply of goods or services. So based on that, this is the analyzing of this renting property for commercial use. So anybody has any specific on this issue, you can. Otherwise, I'll just proceed for the next case study. Yes, hope you are clear. This is a little simple, but we are seeing that this kind of cases are also happening where they are analyzing based on your rental agreement. So be clear on this aspect also. Next. Now the third very interesting case studies, which Prestige Wooden Residential Welfare Association is collecting the sinking fund or corpus fund from its resident members in addition to the maintenance charges from the residents to meet future supply of services. So whatever this corpus fund we are collecting or sinking fund we are collecting from our resident members in addition to maintenance charges, whether there can be any GST levy on those corpus fund or sinking fund. Can it be called as an advance or can we call it as a deposit, and whether any implication of GST on such transactions? So this is one of the common issues which we are facing. I think you all are aware, members, that under the GST law, there is an exemption from GST to the extent of 7,500 per resident, per flat per month. So if it is beyond 7,500, then there is a levy of GST and the aggregate turnover should exceed 20 lakhs. So this has been clarified in CBIC Circular 109. I need not go into detail of that because members are more or less well versed because this was issued in 22 July 2019. So once we are clear with that, there is a levy of GST on maintenance charges when it is exceeding 7,500. In addition to that, many residential welfare associations are collecting the sinking fund or corpus fund. So you can nomenclature at anything like corpus fund or sinking fund, whatever it is. It is beyond, it is collecting as a deposit or it is collecting as an advance. So this is what we have to analyze it. So when we have to look the definition of consideration, or when we are looking that we are collecting something in addition to maintenance charges, whether you have to levy the GST at the time when you are collecting or when you are going to appropriate. So first of all, we have to understand this sinking fund or corpus fund is going to increase your capital or whether it is becoming part of your maintenance charges. So that is what first you have to understand. If you are collecting, for example, I'm also staying in apartment. We have apartments around say 300. We are collecting maintenance charges and also we are collecting certain corpus fund, say for specific purpose of say painting of this apartment or for installing the lift. So if I'm collecting any corpus fund to appropriate any type of supply of services or any type for appropriating any supply of goods, then in that case, you can say that yes, it is a supply of services. Though you will be painting this building after 5 years or after 3 years, but you started collecting this as a fund for specific purpose. So in that case, it can be said that yes, it is an advance or it is the amount which is collected for supply of services, or it is an advance which is collected for supply of services. But if I'm just collecting a sinking fund without appropriating or without without stating it for what purpose if we are collecting, then we can just say that if you are collecting as increasing your capital, you are just collecting for to meet any future contingencies or for any specific, there is no specific purpose for which you are collecting, you're just collecting for your future contingencies, then in that case, we can still call it as deposit until that amount is appropriated for a specific purpose. So once it is appropriated for a specific purpose, then you can say it as a supply of goods or supply of services. So I think this way also we can look into that, because if I was just trying to read this advanced ruling which are coming in a different period of time. So in Prestige South Ridge apartment, they have stated that it is only a deposit. The sinking fund or corpus fund is it's kind of a deposit, and there is no supply of services. So accordingly, there is no levy of GST. That is what they have clarified. But if you look the recent this ruling which has come, that is Ality Landmark Apartment Owner Association, where they have stated that this advances, whatever it is collected for future supply of services, even that will be liable to tax based on time of supply provisions. Because if you look to section 13 time of supply provision, they have said whichever is earlier. So if you have received an advances, or if you have raised an invoice, or if you have provided the services, so whichever earlier, based on that you are liable to pay the GST. So based on the time of supply provisions and saying that it is the amount collected for future supply of services, so it is liable to GST. So we have different views on this applicability of GST on this sinking fund or corporate fund. So we have to be very clear on this, because many times we are seeing that you might have say for example, you will be collecting 7,200 as a maintenance charges plus 500 rupees as your this corpus fund, or 1,000 rupees as corpus fund. So 7,200 plus 1,000, so it might go to 8,200, and it might have an implication of taxes from 1 rupee itself. So you have to be very careful on this aspect, depending upon the association you are looking into that and how you are bifurcating. So if it is specifically in any of your minutes of meeting, or any of your agreement, or any of your document has very clearly stated that this corpus fund is meant for a specific purpose, then I believe that there will be a implication of taxes. So that is what we have to analyze it. Yes. So hope I'm clear on this. So there might be other rulings also on this, other views also on this, but this is what we can understand from the perspective of GST. Yes. Hope I'm audible, members. Am I audible? Anybody can write in chat.
Yes, you are audible, ma'am.
Yes, thank you. Now let us go to the next case study. Hope you are, 1 second. Something I received 1 second.
There are some questions there in the chat box, ma'am.
Yeah, I'm just reading simultaneously so that we can cover that case. Sorry, 1 second just. Now the next question is, amendment to section 7. We'll just come to that, because I have taken it separately, that amendment to section 7. So at that point of time, we'll just discuss on this aspect also. And then whether it is, please remind me, Mahesh, during that point of time, and whether it is for specific or non-specific purpose, it is not a case that the end of it is sharing for common expenses. Hence, existing or specific or general purpose does not make any difference. So there's one view saying that I am just collecting a fund from the residents, so it becomes part of my pool of maintenance charges. So there is no specific that's what you cannot say that yes, only if it is meant for a specific reason or specific purpose, then it is appropriated. That is a view of one of the panelists. But what I can, what I understand, what I can analyze it. See, you are collecting like a fund. It is a reserve. It is kind of a something which you are going to use for your future contingency. So you cannot say whether it will be a supply or it will be lying as a capital. So unless that consideration is appropriated, I cannot say that there is a supply of goods or services. But if I'm collecting a fund for any specific purpose or any specific contingency or any specific, yes, I'm very clear that I'm collecting this sinking fund, say for painting or for installing the lift. I don't know for what purpose I might use this fund, or I may not be using this fund. So depending upon that, I still presume that there might not be any implication of taxes. But though Ality Landmark Association is giving an indication that it is an advances which you are going to collect it for future supply of services, so you are liable to GST. So there is already a contradicting rule which is coming, but please relook into this aspect also. So if you can say that yes, it is only increasing your capital and not forming part of your supply, you can still take into considerations. That is what we can. Hope you're clear, Vinay. I know, I agree with you that yes, I when I'm collecting, I don't know, I might use it or I may not use it. So what I believe is when you're going to appropriate that fund for specific purpose, at that point of time, you are liable to GST, not at this point of time. But Ality has referred to 13 and said it is an advances for future supply of services. That is what they have stated. This all, whatever case studies we are reading, it is not like something I'm giving some final answer or final conclusions. I'm just trying to throw upon the important analyzing of these facts, and you have to be very clear on this by analyzing the ruling law sections, and then you can conclude it. This is only we are giving a reference, and these are the possible views we are just trying to add in the session. Now, next is very interesting. I think this is the most common, which will be more painful to most of us. But let us try to understand next case study. That is, the proprietor firm is a licensed commission agent and is registered under the GST Act. He is complying with the law by filing returns and payment of taxes. He has uploaded GSTR 1 and filed GSTR 3B, but there is a mismatch between GSTR 1 and GSTR 3B. Yes. Now the problem is whether the department can recover the taxes and interest under 75 subsection 12. Please remember, members, now the sections, the way the section is going to, because the amendment is yet to be notified, but still I brought for the members because it is yet to be notified by the state government. So what was earlier and what is now? Earlier, it was stating that, I'll just read out. They have stated that notwithstanding anything contained in 73 or 74, 73 and 74 is pertaining to the adjudication proceedings, where any amount of self-assessed tax is in accordance with the return is furnished under 39 remains unpaid, either wholly or partly, or any amount of interest payable is unpaid, they can recover under the provision of 79. So recovery proceedings can immediately proceed if you have submitted the return, but if you have not filed the returns, it means you have not paid your taxes. So the department can attach your, they can proceed for the recovery immediately if you have just submitted your return but not filed the returns. Now they have made an amendment in the GST law. What they have stated earlier, they have mentioned return furnished under 39, but now they have said in respect of details of outward supplies furnished under 37, and if it is not included in 39, it means what is in 39? 39 is GSTR 3B, and what is there in 37? It is outward supplies. That is nothing but GSTR 1. So if there is a variance between the GSTR 1 and GSTR 3B, even in that case also the power has been given to the government, saying that yes, they can go for recovery under the provision of section 79. So now it has become quite wider, because earlier it was very restrictive, only pertaining to 3B, whatever you were submitting, but you were not filing your 3B. In that case, they were able to do the recovery proceedings. But now if there is a mismatch between the GSTR 1 and GSTR 3B, in that case also, there is a possible, the department can levy. This is yet to be notified. This is just waiting for an amendment, but this is what has been stated in Finance Act 2021. Now I'm referring a case of LC infra case. Why I brought this case is, in this case, the assessee has filed the return, but the department has computed the liability and then it has proceeded for attachment. It has proceeded for recovery. So in that case, it is very clear that if it is a computed liability by the department, they cannot proceed for recovery under 75 subsection 12. Because if you have to recover under this section 75 subsection 12, it should be a self-assessed tax. Self-assessed tax is the tax which is been assessed by the registered person. It should not be a computed liability by the department. So in that, be very clear. So this is what amendment has been made under the respective sections. So now be clear, whenever you are filing GSTR 1 and 3B, please have a reconciliation every month, so that you will not end up paying the differential taxes and interest under this section actually. Yes. So next is, hope members are able to understand this, because just I brought it because now we have to understand that how it is going to come forward. Like it is a techno based, I understand, but you have to reconcile your books not on a basis of financial year or on a specific quarterly basis. You have to reconcile your books for every tax period. So every month, I can say, depending upon quarterly or monthly, you have to reconcile. Otherwise, if there is a variance, automatically there is a possibility of recovery proceedings against your registered persons, because that power has been given now, because specifically they have stated self-assessed tax will include tax payable in respect of details of outward supplies furnished under 37, but not included in return furnished under 39. So many a times we are seeing that some of the registered person are just filing GSTR 1, so that and they are not filing GSTR 3B. So in that case also, the department can levy the taxes whatever you have furnished in your GSTR 1, and if you have not paid the taxes with interest. Yes. So that is what this case pertains to. Just connecting to this, I just thought I'll bring one more important point is how that you can just look into this aspect. There is a provisional attachment, which this is a last resort, which the department can do as a recovery proceedings. So in many instances, we are able to see that the department is directly attaching the bank account. Even in some instances, without intimating to the registered person, they are directly attaching the bank account. So a lot of SSC or registered person has gone to the court and has analyzed, has gone into this section and stated that under these sections, the department has got a power to recover only if the proceedings are pending for like 62, 63, 64, 67, 73, 74. So 62, 63, 64 is nothing but it is relating to your best judgment assessment or non-filer returns or scrutiny of returns or search inspections or during adjudication. Only when the proceedings are pending only under this respective section, then only the department can proceed for in the interest of revenue, they can attach the bank account. But now what after amendment, what they are going to do is they have widened in such a manner that they have said initiation of any proceeding under chapter 12, chapter 14 and chapter 15. It means any sections pertaining under this chapter, whether it is under this is audit or relating to search inspections or relating to adjudications, they have said any sections the department has been given power that if there is any initiation of proceeding under these respective chapters, even in that case, the department can proceed, the government can proceed for attaching your bank account in the interest of revenue. So I think we have to be very careful now after this amendment. And prior to this amendment, many times the department has visited for search and they have said immediately you have to pay this amount. I think some of you would have experienced that they just come for inspections or they just come for investigations or they said, no, you are liable to pay 10 lakhs, 20 lakhs, please deposit this amount in your cash ledger. I think this all we have experienced in last 3 years. So that's why we have something, this case as Jayambe Filament Limited versus this Bhumi Enterprises, where it is a Gujarat High Court case where they have given the instruction to the officer. They have given a circular or instruction to the officer that what they are supposed to do when they are going to go for the search or inspection. So very clearly in the Bhumi Enterprise, they have stated that they cannot collect the check. They cannot ask the person to deposit the check when they are going for search or investigation. So they have said you have to first complete your proceedings and then you can ask the registered person to pay the amount through DRC3 depending upon the facts of the case. Otherwise, you just cannot, during the proceedings, you cannot collect the taxes. So I think that is really will help a lot of registered persons, because many times registered persons are getting harassed during the time of audit or search or survey or investigations based on this. So I think you can refer this case of Bhumi Associate and this Jayambe Filament Private Limited to understand to what extent the powers have been given and what is the instructions which are given to the officers when they are coming for search or survey proceedings. So I think this is what I just thought I'll bring to the notice of the members. So you can just refer this whenever you have to face any such proceedings actually. And now if you see after amendment, they have said initiation of any proceedings. Whereas if you see under the earlier prior to amendment, which is they have said pendency of any proceedings. So I think now it looks that it is becoming more and more wider for them to attach the bank account and any property. Right? Any issues? Yes, I'll proceed for that. Now next issue is, hope I'm audible, because if I don't, I'm audible.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. The next case study 5, which we have is, this is I'll just read out the case. Like A has purchased the goods from B company for rupees 5 lakhs plus tax at the rate of 5%, so around 25,000. A has also sold the goods to B of rupees 1 lakh plus 5%, that is 5,000. The issue is whether A can avail the input tax credit of 25,000 or he can avail only 20,000, as there is a book adjustment of settled amount and has paid 4 lakh plus 20,000 to B company. Now, whether provision of section 16.2 will allow such book adjustment. So now the issue is, I think most of the members are aware, we have a provision under the GST law saying that whatever, whenever you are availing the input tax credit, and if you have not paid your vendor the value of supply of goods or services plus taxes within 180 days from the date of invoice, then the recipient is liable to reverse his input tax credit with interest at 18%. So now the issue is, in this case, the A company and B company, I have purchased the goods and I have also sold the goods to the same person. So in that case, instead of paying 5 lakhs and receiving 1 lakh, what we have done is, in the book itself, we have settled it. Yes, there is something due to that vendor and due to that recipient. So we have settled it and we have paid only 4 lakh plus 20,000. Now under this 16.2 proviso, whether I can take credit of full 25,000 or I can take credit of 20,000 only, because ultimately I paid only 4 lakh 20,000 to my supplier. So whether I can take credit of 25,000 or 20,000, because in my books I'm adjusting it, but ultimately I'm paying even to my vendor as 20,000 only. So the issue is whether I can take credit of 25,000 or 20,000. This was the issue. So we were just trying to read 16.2 provision also, and we are trying to understand what are the rulings which are coming. I'm not saying it is binding, but trying to understand, looking into the definition of consideration also, and looking into the definition of value, that yes, we are liable to make a payment, but we are not paying in the form of monetary terms. We are trying to go with the book adjustment because there is something due to that other party also. So accordingly, we are adjusting in our books of accounts. So it has been discussed in one of the advanced ruling of Senco Coal Limited, where they have said that where the payee owes the payer a debt and accept reduction in such debt liability, that is also a valid form of consideration, and such a reduction in debt liability can be regarded as a valid consideration. So the issue is whether input tax credit would be admissible when the settlements are done by way of book adjustment. Yes. So if you look these rulings, they have given a signal saying that yes, you can take a credit of 25,000, though there is a book adjustment, because ultimately the transaction is genuine. There is no that you are doing any paying partly and enjoying the full credit. There is something which they have also sold it and which we are also taking a credit of that. So I think with this analyzing, according to my view, you can enjoy the credit of 25,000. But what is the issue is, there is a possibility that tomorrow the department or the government can raise an issue that you have paid taxes of only 20,000 to your vendor, then how can you take a credit of 25,000? So you can just re-look into that, because valuation provisions will be different and input tax credit provisions will be different. But please re-look into this aspect. Paying 25,000 to your vendor, plus you can reduce the amount in your value amount. So instead of paying 5 lakh, you can just 4 lakh, you can reduce to 3,95,000. So something you can relook, because ultimately tomorrow we don't want to say that we are, though we are taking a credit of 20,000 and losing the balance 5,000 will be a huge cost to the company. So to avoid litigations, it is better that you adjust only in the principal amount and not to the taxes. I think this is what I can look into that from the litigation perspective to avoid the litigations. And because the next aspect is there's one more issue which has been discussed in MRF Limited, where the facts are quite different from the fact what I've stated in this case study. Here the facts are the supplier has supplier has raised the invoice of 1 lakh plus 5,000 to the recipient. The recipient has paid that amount within a short period of time of say 1 month. Though he would have taken the credit period of 3 months, he said, okay, I'll pay it within 1 month. So in that scenario, the supplier will give a post-supply discounts to a recipient or through any terms, whether it is a quantity discount or whatever it is. He want to give a post-supply discount to the recipient. And as the members, you are available that we don't have any specific deduction for post-supply discounts unless we are able to fulfill the condition of section 15, because it should be agreed at the time of supply. If any discount has to be given after the supply, then it has to be agreed at the time of supply. But in this scenario, this discount was not agreed at the time of supply. The invoice has been raised on 1 lakh plus 5,000, and the recipient also has enjoyed the credit of 5,000. Now the issue is, he has given a post-supply discount of 10,000. So ultimately, the recipient has paid 90,000 plus 5,000. So ultimately, the recipient has paid 95,000. So whether he should reverse his input tax credit. Now the issue is, whether he should reverse his input tax credit because the supplier has given a post-supply discounts. So this issue has been discussed in MRF Limited, and basically it is giving a indication that you are eligible, you can take credit only to the extent of whatever the payments are made to the supplier. But if you read the law and if you read the section 15 also, I think this post-supply discount should not have any impact on taxes, because ultimately we are referring to the valuation rules, and as per the valuation rules, you are complying by charging 1 lakh and you are giving a discount by 10,000. So ultimately the supplier also has paid the full taxes. I am not taking any reduction in my output tax liability. Even the recipient is also enjoying the full input tax credit. So according to me, there should not be any reduction in input tax credit, and he should be given eligibility of full input tax credit of this 5,000, though there is a post-supply discount of 10,000. So ultimately he paid only 90,000 to supplier instead of 1 lakh. So I think this is what my view on this post-supply discount, because I believe that ITC provisions and 15 are different, and we have to look that we discharge the entire liability of taxes. That is very important. This 95,000 is 90 plus 5,000 is towards the taxes. Yes. So I think there are certain rulings which are coming on these issues, but be clear, because many times we do a lot of book adjustments between head office to branch office, or between the customer who is directly paying to head office to the branch office. So we have to be very clear in all the scenarios whether we are able to fulfill that 16(2) conditions, because ultimately if you are not making the payment to our vendor with full value and taxes, then there is a possibility of reversing your input tax credit. So I think that is what we have to look. If the supplier reverses the output tax, then the liability will rise to the, yes, if the supplier has reduced his liability, then definitely the recipient also should reverse the input tax credit, because that is what stated in the section 15 condition also for pertaining to discounts. They have said that whenever the supplier is there are two conditions which has to be fulfilled to give the benefit of deduction for discount. Is the supplier should reduce the taxes from his output tax liability, and simultaneously the recipient should also reverse the input tax credit. So only those two conditions are fulfilled, then only you will get the deductions of taxes towards discounts. Yes, sir. Rajgopal, sir, I'm clear. So if the supplier has reversed, then even the recipient should also reverse the. Now next is whether any impact of section 16 subsection 2C. I think this is most common to all the members, I think, who are there here. This is the most common we are facing in day-to-day practice from last 3 years, and there are various returns which we are able to look, and day by day it is adding up actually. So many scenarios your supplier would have. So I've just taken a simple case study on this. So if supplier has filed GSTR 1 and not filed GSTR 3B, then if you have a tax, so basically if he has filed only GSTR 1 and if he has not filed GSTR 3B, and if you look section 16(2), they have said that the tax should be paid by the supplier. So here the tax is not paid in GSTR 1. The taxes are paid only through GSTR 3B. So accordingly, input tax credit will not be eligible. The second scenario is, what if I have tax invoice and my supplier has filed GSTR 3B but not reflected in GSTIN? So he has already paid the taxes. Though it might not reflect in your 2A, but it is still possibility that he has filed his GSTR 3B, he has paid those taxes. Then in that case, you can still fight upon based on section 16(2) subsection fee, because they are using the words tax to be paid by the supplier. So the taxes are paid only through 3B and it is not paid through GSTR 1. So in that scenario, you can look into this. Next is, what if I have tax invoice and my supplier has neither filed GSTR 3B and not filed GSTR 1. So in that case, you are not fulfilling one of the condition that your supplier has not paid the taxes. So in that case, you can say that, yes, I have not fulfilled the condition, so you are not eligible for credit. And now we are looking, I think this is the most common mismatch of your ITC claimed and reflected in 2A due to various reasons. Possibly your supplier would have declared as B2C, but he would have paid the taxes, but he would have declared in his GSTR 1 as B2C, or he would have not declared, or he would have declared in the subsequent months. You would have availed the credit in the respective months. So I think this mismatch is happening every time. And now they are going to come out with that amendment is yet to be notified, where they have stated that the details of the invoice or debit note has been furnished by the supplier in the statement of outward supplies, and such details should be communicated to the recipient. So only if you are going to fulfill this condition. So ultimately, if it is reflected in your 2A and 2B, then only you are going to get eligibility of input tax credit. So once this comes, I think even this rule 36 sub rule 4 will also will be diluted, because already it has been diluted from 20% to 10% and 10% to 5%. So I think after this amendment, this will get diluted. And I think more or less members are aware what is rule 36 sub rule 4, which is giving a provisional credit, though it is not reflecting in your 2A. So I think after this amendment, it will become a very strict rule, very stringent rule. Now the issue is, this is not retrospective. This amendment is definitely going to happen prospective. So what about the reconciliations which was required prior to this amendment, whether we can still litigate on that, saying that yes, this section has been introduced, this condition has been introduced only from a respective date. So accordingly, I think there is a lot of litigations which will definitely go for the prior to this amendment, because of difference in matching between 2A, and there are the litigations which are pending for rule 36 sub rule 4 also, because section is not amended, but they have incorporated rule 36 sub rule 4. So I think these all litigations we are expecting pertaining to this. But just for the members, I just want to just make you clear that to be clear on this, be clear with your 2A, 2B, because now everything you have to integrate your ledgers with the electronic cash ledger, electronic credit ledger, electronic liability ledger. You have to integrate your books with the GST portal, I can say, because unless it is not going to get matched, you might have impact on your working capital, you might have impact on your other adjustments in your books of accounts, or in your finalization of your books of accounts. And ultimately, input tax credit is your vested right. So just look into those aspects and look into. There are a lot of cases which are going on that yes, you cannot penalize the purchasing dealer for non-compliances of the selling dealer. Like in Arise India, in Delhi High Court, there's a decision. And even under the GST law, we have DY Enterprises, where they said when the seller has collected, then the omission is on the seller to remit the taxes and not on the purchasing dealer. So that is what the proceeding. So ultimately, they are saying that even the selling dealer should also be penalized for the non-compliances. So I think we have to wait and see how this section will get operative, and you have to just wait and watch on this. Yes. Shall I proceed next? I think this most of you would have experienced this. So this is quite interesting, and we'll link with that RWA also. So here, I think this is a major amendment which is going to happen in the GST law, and this is like ultimately we were trying to analyze whether supply of goods and services by club or association to its member is liable to GST or not. This issue is going from multiple decades, and this issue was even litigated under the service tax law. And I think most of the members are aware that we had a Supreme Court decision of Calcutta Club versus West Bengal, Commissioner of West Bengal, where they have stated that based on the principal doctrine of mutuality, they have stated that it is the supply to the same person. So there are no two persons as an association or a club. So based on that concept of mutuality, they have said there is no levy of service tax. Now the issue is whether the same ruling we can apply in the GST law. So that litigation was going from last 2 to 3 years. And based on the judicial ruling and based on the principle of mutuality, many clubs or associations have not collected the taxes or not paid the taxes. Now, so to override that, they have come out with an amendment in section 7, subsection 1AA, where they have stated that the activity or transactions by a person other than individual to its members or vice versa for cash, deferred payment or valuable consideration. So this will be also treated as supply of goods or services. So they have said it is a supply. It is covering within the scope of supply. And very clearly in the section itself, they have come out saying that it is clarified that notwithstanding anything contained in any other law. So even if you have Supreme Court decision in the erstwhile law, they are going to override with that, and they have stated that it is always stated that it shall be deemed to be a two separate person, and supply of activity shall be deemed to take place between one person to another person. So this amendment is going to come out retrospectively from 1/7/2017. So if any of the clubs or associations, if they have not paid the taxes based on the principle of mutuality, I think they have to relook into that, because after this amendment, this is going to come out retrospectively. So there is an implication of taxes on those supplies. So possibly what are the type of, generally they have the supplies, like if they're collecting membership fees. So we have to analyze whether those membership fees will have any implication of taxes, because can you say that there is no supply of goods or service I'm just collecting a membership fees to become a member of the club. Can I say it as a capital contribution, or can I say it is as a consideration against the supply of goods? So I think this is looks to be a litigation. We have to just wait and see how to analyze this membership fees taxes. Then yearly subscriptions we collect for supply of these amenities to the members. So that can be taken as supply of services that may have an implication of taxes after this amendment notified. Then supply of food to members, yes, it is also services, there is an implication. And many times we have certain goods which will be sold to the members, like during providing, like swimming dress, sports items, many other things are sold to the members against certain consideration. So even in that case also, it can have an implication of taxes. Now the most important is whether why they have used the word only as cash deferred payment or other valuable considerations. So can I say that only a monetary consideration or even a non-monetary consideration can also form part of it? According to me, yes, even non-monetary form also can form part of my considerations. But very important is when you're looking into this aspect, whether any free supply of goods are given between this club to the members, something free has been given, or by member is giving certain free items to the club, whether they will have any implication on that. I think according to me, it may not have any implication of taxes when something free is given to by club to the members or by members to the club, because they're not as a related parties. So based on that, I believe that yes, there is a implication of taxes retrospectively. So any clubs or any association, if they're not paid on the principle of mutuality, kindly relook into their arrangement and kindly see that there might be impact of taxes based on this amendment. And there is an extended period of limitation cannot be invoked. So please, you can relook into that. There's a specified time within which they might be having an implication of taxes. So if it is beyond the extended period of limitation, you can relook. You may not be liable to pay the taxes. So you please relook into all those aspects also. Yes. I'm just throwing upon the issues and what are the possible things we can have under this implication under the GST law. Yes. So recently they were discussing on this race clubs are liable to pay GST on the betting amount or commission amount. I think most of you would have read on this because this applied to a Bangalore turf club actually. So now they have stated, because earlier the valuation rules was saying that it is on the whole entire betting amount they are liable to pay GST, but now they have come out with a decision saying that they are also acting as an agent or a stockbroker. So ultimately there will be GST impact only on the commission amount what they are collecting and not on the entire bet amount. So whatever the rule itself, they have stated that it is ultra vires. So that is what has been clarified. You can read this decision in detail. It is quite interesting, but it is pertaining to lottery, betting, gambling, or horse racing. And earlier, and under the erstwhile law, we were paying luxury tax and Mysore betting tax. But after the GST, they have incorporated in the as a part of GST, and they have given a valuation rules for lottery, betting, gambling, and horse racing separately. So basically, for horse racing, they have come out with a specific saying that you are liable to that rule 31A, whatever has been clarified, saying that they are liable to pay the tax on betting amount, that has been stated as ultra vires. So we have to see that it might go to the higher authority also. Yes. Mahesh, I think you were talking on that this residential welfare association, whether it can fit here. Yes, it can fit here. It will have an implication. So based on this, I agree that activities or transactions they have used here. So, but what I was talking in that RWA case is pertaining to my sinking fund. So though it is activities or transactions, but this is from the activities or transactions from the club perspective. But there I am saying that appropriation of that respective considerations. So I think still we can look into that, saying that it is a capital contribution and not a consideration against the supply of service. We can just re-look into that aspect also. Yes. Hope I'm clear, Mahesh. Now, next case study. ABC company is a manufacturer of agarbatti, which is liable to tax at 5%. And they've also availed the input tax credit on basically like chemicals they'll be using, or certain job work services they'll be using, or any other services they'll be using, professional services. And they have applied for refund of unutilized input tax credit of inputs and input services to the department. And the department has given the refund only for the inputs, and they have rejected the refund for input services. So based on that, they are just not getting the refund of input services. So there's a Gujarat High Court decision. They have said no, rejecting this refund of input services is ultra vires, because ultimately you are liable to give the refund of both input and input services, because both are used for manufacturing this agarbatti. But based on reading of section 54 subsection 3 and rule 89, they are just giving the refund of only inputs which are used in the manufacture of this agarbatti, and they are not giving the refund of input services. So I think this case is pending before the Supreme Court. So we have to wait and watch, because there is one more decision of Tamil Nadu, which they have said that no, net and ITC will not include input services. It will include only input. So we have to wait and watch pertaining to the refund of input services in case of inverted duty structure. Then see, it is just pending before the courts. Yes. Sure. Can you just appropriation from sinking fund is taxable? That's what I'm saying. We have to see how we are going to. If you are specific for specific purpose, I can, according to my view, yes, you can say that if you want to, if you're not paid any taxes on that, and if you want to take a, if you have already collected taxes, then there is no issues. But if you have not already collected taxes, you can still try to litigate, saying that it is only a capital contribution and it is not relating to consideration against supply of services. Otherwise, based on this OLIT apartment case, you are liable to taxes. Yeah, this is also a little interesting pertaining to this revocation of registration. So case study 9 is ABC Enterprise have not filed the returns. I think this is the most common, and they will receive the notices for cancellation of registrations. Now they applied for revocation of cancellations, and they have filed the returns also under the GST law. Now the department has rejected the revocation on the ground that tax dues are not paid. So in my return, I have declared both my output and input, and I have applied for revocations. So whether department can reject my revocation, saying that whatever the input tax credit you have taken is not correct, or it is eligible, ineligible. So basically, during revocations, please remember, no assessment or adjudication can be done at the time of revocations. So this has been decided in one of the judicial pronouncement also, saying that during revocation, the condition is that the registered person should file the returns and pay the taxes. Whether it is correct taxes or wrong taxes is not the not within the purview of that authority to look into at the time of revoking their cancellation. So after revoking their cancellation, they can further proceed for audit and adjudications. So basically, we have to remember that many times your revocations are getting rejected because it is stated that your taxes are not correctly paid, or your output tax is not correct, or input tax credit is not availed correctly. So we can give a reference to this, and we can say that yes, no assessment or adjudication can be done at the time of revocation. It can be done post to the revocation if there is any doubt on that. Then next is we are having a case study. Like this is a practical case study which we have faced it. There's one entity which have not filed the returns, and they have received the notice for cancellations. And this entity has not applied for revocations within 90 days. Earlier it was 30 days plus 30 days, 30 days. Now they have made it GST law. He couldn't apply because already he got to know at a later point of time that this has been cancelled. So the time limit for appeal is 3 months plus 1 month. So even that time is elapsed. So now what is the option to this entity? Whether because he don't have the option of revocations, he don't have the option of appeal. So how he has to proceed? So should he go for new registrations, or should he uh, have any other option actually? So there is no such specific alternate as option I'm finding in the law actually, but he can go for new registrations, or but the issue is he will have an impact of his input tax credit or stock transfer, because everything has to get transferred, and again he might lose certain benefits also. Or we have to just wait and see, like, because this is the option they are specifying, but only luckily what happened, we have a Supreme Court suo motu order for extended limitation period. I think all the members are aware from last COVID period, the Supreme Court decision has come out for extended period of limitations, which is still effective, and it can be, and now they have in April first week, I remember, again they have extended the Supreme Court order, which has been issued last year, and they've extended the further period until further order, and this is applicable even to the taxation laws. So I think based on this, we can just utilize the benefit of extended limitation period and file the returns, but we have to just wait and see. Like, these are also the certain cases which we have to be specific on that. Yes. Then this is one more interesting which we are finding now. Whether interest under section 50 subsection 1 is payable on gross basis or net basis in case of additional turnover declared in subsequent month based on provision to section 50 subsection 1. I think from last 3 years, we all are litigating on the interest to be payable on gross basis or interest basis, because we always believe that whenever we are going to pay interest, it is output tax minus input tax, so balance net tax. So ultimately, if there's any taxes we are going to pay at a later point of time, we will pay with interest at on net tax. But if you look section 50 subsection 1, which is very clear that it is liable on the tax payable. Now they have added a provision, very, very interesting provision in section 50 subsection 1. They have stated that provided that interest on tax payable in respect of supplies made during a tax period and declared in the return for the said month, in accordance with the provision of section 39, except where returns are furnished under 73 or 74. So what they mean is, if you have filed the returns for pertaining to October, say for example, pertaining to this October, I am filing it in December. So if you are delayed in filing your returns, then in that case, you are liable to pay interest on net basis. That is your output tax minus input tax, whatever the balance tax payable, you are liable to pay, because interest on tax payable in respect of supplies made during a tax period and declared in the return for the set period after the due date. So for the month of October, you are supposed to file your return by November 20th, whereas you have filed on December 20th. So in that case, the department has said, okay, if you're delayed in filing your return, you can pay your interest on net basis. But my case study is, there is some turnover which is there in October, say 10 lakhs. I have declared in my October return only as 6 lakhs. I have not declared the whole 10 lakhs. I have declared only 6 lakhs. So balance 4 lakhs I'm going to declare in the month of December. So whether the interest will be payable on that 4 lakh on gross basis or net basis. So looking into these provisions, according to my view, it will be on gross basis, because there is no specific clarity. They have only said interest on tax payable in respect of supplies made during a tax period. So this supply is made in October. Time of supply has already been applied in October itself, but you have not filed in that respective month, and you have filed at a later point of time. So on that basis, I believe that reading into this provision to section 50 subsection 1, it will be liable to tax on gross basis. So be careful on this aspect. When is the scenarios when you are liable to pay tax interest on net basis? There are the scenarios where you will be liable to pay interest on gross basis. So there is a certain press release where there all administrative circulars were there, which has given certain aspect of interest payable on gross basis. Gross is nothing but output tax, and net is nothing but output tax minus input tax, so on the balance net taxes. So there are certain judicial rulings also, like Megha Engineering and all, where they have said you are liable to pay on gross basis. But now they have, this is yet to be notified. But if this provision come, this will be also from retrospective effect, and this is also liable on net basis. But if you're not filed the return, and if some proceedings have been taken by the department under 73 and 74, after that, if you're filing the returns, then you are liable to pay interest on gross basis. So please be careful on this, because interest is liable at 18%. So you have to be very careful on the scenarios where you will be liable to paying the interest on gross basis and net basis. Hope I'm clear, members. Then there's one more scenarios where this is a common thing which is happening, which may happen during your audit proceedings also. Because there is a one of the entity who has moved the goods, say, from one place to the other place without complying with the e-way bill. He has not he has not issued any e-way bill, and goods has moved from, say, Bangalore to Mysore, but there was no e-way bill. Check post officer had checked it, and already they have moved goods from one place to the another place. Now, during audit, during audit of this entity, whether the department can levy penalty under 129 and 130, saying that you have not complied with e-way bill. I think this is what the common issues you can find it during your assessment or audit. So basically, we have to understand this 129 and 130 is an independent of your adjudication. It will be levied only when the goods are in movement from one place to the other place. So if they have to raise these issues for levy the penalty under 129 and 130, they cannot levy the penalty when they are doing the audit under section 65. They can levy the penalties under other section like 122 or 125, but they cannot levy the penalty under 129 and 130, because this is a specific sections which has been specified for a specific purpose and for specific conditions are attached in 129 and 130. So there should be a detention of goods, there should be seizure of goods. So all these conditions has to be fulfilled when they have to levy the penalty under 129 and 1. So the audit officer cannot raise this levy of penalty for this 129 and 130 during the audit or assessment of the books of accounts. That is what I believe. We have to wait and see how it will be levied. Yes. Then this is also one of the important point I want to bring it out. Because I've just used a small this saying that ABC company is supplying these hand sanitizers or oximeters to SEZ under LUT. So whether SEZ has used such items to comply with the COVID protocols, whether I can say that this is for the authorized operations. Because if you read the meaning of authorized operations, they are saying that setting up operations, maintenance, and expansion of unit. So can I say that whatever I'm using this hand sanitizers or oximeters or whatever it is for in the organization, can I say it is for authorized operations? So if it is not for authorized operations, then there is a possibility that there might be a reversal of input tax credit. So you may not enjoy the benefit of refund. So I think we have to wait, because in section it is yet to be notified for authorized operation, whereas in rule already they have stated that if you have to take a benefit of refund, the goods should be supplied to SEZ for authorized operations. So I think here this kind of issues we are going to face it further. So please be careful on this, whether you have to go for the refund option or whether you have to go for adjustment of your input tax credit against the. So these are the things, certain things, because ultimately if you're going to supply to SEZ, you have to just link your supply with the authorized operations. We are just waiting. Government might notify certain supplies which you can make it on payment of taxes. That we have to just wait and see in what all cases they are going to allow for payment of taxes. Then this is one more. I think most of you are aware that the government has reduced the COVID-related items like pulse oximeter, testing kits, oxygen concentrator. A lot of items they have reduced the rate of taxes from 18% to 5% with effect from 14 June 2021. So the issue is now whether they can claim the reduction, claim the refund of this differential taxes 18 minus 5%. I think we have to, in the notification, they have given the reduction in the rate of taxes. And I was just trying to read the circular of 135 CBC, where they have said that if there is a reduction, the registered person cannot claim the refund of credit for the cannot claim the refund for the differential taxes, or for when there is a difference in, when there is a change in the rate of taxes. So I think based on the 135, I believe that you cannot take a refund. But if you read specifically 135, they are giving a reference to trader. So in this case, if it's a manufacturer, I think you can just relook into that. They can take a refund of accumulated ITC. So we have to wait and watch if there is any further clarification on this aspect actually. And the second important point is most of this pharmaceutical company, they will be selling at MRP. So most of the items will be covered at 18%. So if you have to look into those valuation, recompute the taxes of 5%, after removing this 18%, for example, if it is 30,000 and if 30,000 is including 18%, please remove that 18% from 30,000. So ultimately on the balance amount, you have to collect a 5%. So please, you can just look into the valuation aspect when you're charging a 5% on those MRP items. Yes, members, hope I'm not very fast. Any doubt till now? I'll proceed then. Any doubt, members? Hope I'm just giving a reference or giving a thought process on the different scenarios. Yes. Is it fine? Shall I proceed?
Yes, ma'am. I think there is no questions or anything.
Yes, yes. Okay. Then I think today we were waiting for the decision of this actually. This whether intermediary services are treated as export of services and whether they are liable for IGST, because we are already struggling under the existing IGST Act, whether this is liable to tax under, whether it is liable as IGST taxes or whether it is liable as intra taxes as CGST and HGST. So already section 13 subsection 8B based on the section with giving reference to section 7 and 8 of IGST Act, where the place of supply is given as location of supplier and the location of supplier. So if there's a transactions between the location of supplier, it is always an intrastate transaction. So it is liable for CGST and SGST. So the intermediary services aspects are discussed in Material Recycling Association of India, which has stated that intermediary services are liable to taxes. Now the next is whether in AT Enterprises or Dharmendra M. Jani, they are discussing whether intermediary services can be treated as export of services or export of goods, because the issue is, for example, a agent is export of service. Whether, for example, an agent is there, an intermediary is there in India, he's procuring the foreign orders and he's identifying the customers. So for that, he's getting a commission from his foreign company. So the issue is whether you can treat it as an export of services or whether you will treat it as an intermediary services. So basically, it has been stated that one of the judge today in the case of AT Enterprises has stated that it should be treated as an at par with the other export of services, and intermediary services should not be made liable to tax in India, because ultimately it is the foreign buyer who is enjoying that services. So though the Indian entity is receiving the commission as an intermediary, he should also be given the benefit of export of services based on Article 14 of the Constitution. So it is analyzing, it is still pending. We have to just wait and see. I think it might go to larger bench also. But today the decision was supposed to be decided or discussed on this issue. So we have to just wait what further decision will come. So I'm just updating you that this is the issue which is pending, which we have to wait and decide. Otherwise, intermediary services are liable to tax under the GST Act based on section 13 subsection 8 and B. So till the decisions are come, it is still not treated as export of services, and they are liable to taxes. So this is a recent notifications which has come in case of JDA agreement, where there was always an issue that whether landlord can enjoy the credit which has been raised by the developer. Though this was already clarified in notification 6/19 dated 29th March, but still they have come out with a further more clarity. They have given a very clear-cut clarity in notification 3/21 dated 26, saying that landowner can utilize the credit which has been raised by the developer against his construction services out of his sale of. So whatever the landlord is going to sell the apartments, he can adjust the input tax credit against the tax charged by the developer to the landowner. So this is just to give the benefit of credit to the passing on credit from the developer to the landowner. They have made a clarity in this aspect. So according to this case study, yes, the landlord also can utilize the credit of tax charged by the developer prior to the completion. Any issues on this joint development agreement? Anybody has any specific? Anybody's dealing in this type of cases actually? Because I think it is very clear that they can take the credit only to the extent of what output tax the landowner is charging. But they have just made, it's nothing like something new they have brought it. They have made a more clear cut saying that yes, in this case, the developer can pass on the credit to the landowner before the completion of projects. So if there is any liability, because ultimately the developer is the one who is availing all the input tax credit, and he can pass on the credit to the extent of the share of flats which are being sold by the landowner prior to the completion certificate or first possession, whichever is earlier. So based on that, you can, based on this notification also, the landowner can enjoy the credit and reduce his liabilities. Then next is next case study is pertaining to the this ABC company has not filed the GSTR returns from April 2019 till date due to conflicts in the management. They have decided to file the returns now. So whether such company can avail the input tax credit from April 2019? Can anybody write in chat box yes or no at least? Anybody one yes or no? Can they avail the credit from April 19 while filing the returns? Yes. No, not possible. I'm getting all different answers. No, not possible. Yes. So basically, we have to read section 16 subsection 4, which has given the time limit to avail the input tax credit. So what the time limit for 1920 is, you can avail the credit up to the due date of filing a return for pertaining to September 2020. So for 1920, you have the due date up to October 20. And for 2021, you have the due date up to October 21, subject to all extension. So ultimately, when you see this from April 19 to March 20, they are liable to pay output tax, but they may not be able to enjoy the credits because already the time limit to avail the input tax credit has been expired. Now they can take the credit from April 2022 till date. They can take, because for April 22, March 2021, they have time limit to avail the credit up to September to October 2021. So I think for 1 year they are not eligible. For another year they are eligible because section 16 subsection 4 states not entitled to take credit after the due date of furnishing the return for the month of September following the financial year or annual return, whichever is earlier. So for 1920, we have time till September, October. That is due date of September is October 20. Yes, so you are clear. So 1920 not eligible, 2021 you are eligible. Yes, right, Mahesh. I'm just trying to see. Decided to file why such company can avail the. Just making one more change in that. What in case if the company, I'm just changing this, he has not filed the GSTR returns, but whether if he is going to file this GSTR 1 for if he is availing the credit, what is the implications we can see? Because for 1920, he presumed that he don't have money, he want to file the credit, he want to file the returns. Can he still file the returns? So even though if he files GSTR 1 or this GSTR 3B, if it is a B2B transactions, whether the recipient can take the credit. There's some change I made in this case study. Hope you're, I'll just try to repeat. I am filing GSTR 1 for April 19 till date. Now, my question is whether the recipient can take the credit of April 19 invoice return which has been filed by my vendor, assuming that it is a B2B transactions. ABC company has not filed. Now I'm going to file. So whether my recipient can take the credit? Yes or no? Since not paid, can't take for 1920. Anybody else? Because he's filing his GSTR 1 now. Can I take the credit for 1920 and 2021? I think this is what issue we have to wait and see. Based on the invoice received by the recipient, credit can be taken. Okay. Any other view? Are you able to get? Yes, file the returns. Now he is going to file the return. Whether the recipient can take the credit. That is what my case study here. Because to avail the credit, we have to again look into 16 subsection 2. So we are fulfilling all the conditions. I have filed my return, supplier has paid the taxes, I have received the invoices, and I have received the goods or services. So I have fulfilled all the conditions. So the credit has been disclosed in my last year, whereas I am enjoying that credit now. In 1920, already I have taken that credit. But GSTR 1 is filed now. Whether department can reverse my input tax credit for 1920 or whether I have to show it again in my 2021, 22. I think this is what is the issue which we are facing today. Many times they are filing GSTR 1 later point of time. The department is not agreeing because they are giving you the credit only after the GSTR 1 is filed by the vendor. This issue was there for 17, 18, 18, 19, 19, 20. Now I think after this GSTR 2A reconciliation will come into picture, I think this issue may not be considered. But for these 3 years, I think we are having these issues where you are not able to enjoy the credit if you have already availed the credit and later point of time your vendor has filed the returns. So this is what you have to analyze from this case study. Yes, you are able to get the point what we are trying to discuss here. Then next, another 2-3 case studies we have. Next case studies, ABC company has exported the goods to USA in April 2020. ABC company has applied for refund under section 54 subsection 3 of unutilized input tax credit, and refund has been sanctioned. So they got the refund as an exporters, and they have exported without payment of taxes. But such company has not realized the export proceeds from USA outside India. For example, we are very clear that whenever we are reading the definition of export of services, we have to see that all the conditions are fulfilled, like supplier is located in India, place of provision of services outside, supply is outside India, the recipient is located outside India, the consideration should be received in foreign exchange. Whereas such condition is not applicable for export of goods, because export of goods is nothing but taking goods outside India from India to outside India. So there is only a movement of goods from India to crossing the territories of India. So basically it is just a movement of goods. So they have not imposed any condition as such for export of goods. So whether the refund can be denied saying that you have not realized the consideration from your recipient, because for service anyway it is a precondition. To determine it as export of services, you have to realize the consideration in foreign exchange. But whereas such condition is not there for the export of goods. So whether in that case, if I have received the refund, but I have not received the export proceeds, whether first issue is whether I can apply for refund. Yes, you can apply for refund. But whether the refund has to be refunded back. Because if you have not received the export proceeds, whether the department can recover your refund amount. So they have inserted rule 96B, that is pertaining to recovery of your refunded unutilized credit, where the export proceeds are not realized. And there is a possibility that they are going to make an amendment, which is yet to be notified, in section 16.4 of IGSTR, where they have said that if you are making any zero rated supply of goods and in case of non-realization of sale proceeds, you are liable to deposit the refund along with the interest within 30 days after the expiry of time limit specified in FEMA. So what is the time limit specified in FEMA to realize the export proceeds? It is 9 months, right? So if you have not realized the export proceeds of within 9 months plus extended period of 3 months, that's as the case may be. So if you have not realized the export proceeds within 9 months after the export of goods, then you have to refund back your refunds. So the department can recover your refund amount. So be careful. This was there only for services. Now they have even inserted for goods also. So you have to just look into that, whatever the time has been specified in FEMA for receiving your foreign exchange remittances in such manner as may be prescribed. Hope you are clear. So in this case, if they have not realized the proceed within 9 months, that is from April, if they are not realized till January, then they are liable to refund the amount. So this is the conditions as specified. Yes. Any doubt? Now the case study 19 is ABC companies are exporters and they have filed the returns for 1920 and 2021. And they have also availed they had input tax credit in 1920 and they had no export turnover in 1920. They were just having a lot of input credits in that respective year. And they had exports in 2021. So whether this company can apply for refund. You are getting, because in 1 year I had only credit, and in another year I had only turnover. I did not have any credits. So earlier there was this issue where application has to be filed in each application has to be filed in each respective financial year. But in Circular 135 CBC in 2019, they have made an amendment stating that in such scenario, they have given an option to file a combined applications for multiple financial years. So in this kind of scenarios also, the registered person can file one applications for the both the financial year 2019-20 and 2020 and 21. So that this is because these practical issues which many of the exporters were facing. In some months they had credit, they did not have turnover. In some period they had turnover but no credit. So now this problem will be resolved and you can be able to file the combined refund application for the multiple financial years. Yes. Just received a query. Now, the next case study is M&O company has consigned the goods from Bangalore to Hyderabad, and transporter has carried all the required documents, including e-way bill, invoice. So the check post officer has detained the goods, stating that the e-way bill is expired, and also has raised the contention that HSN classifications is not correct. So what can be, whether the department can detain the goods saying that e-way bill is expired? 1 second, I think before this I'll just answer the question. Meaning can be combined for 2 years. Yes, Rajgopal sir. You can combine the applications for 2 years. You can compute your refund, consolidating the turnover and input tax credit for 2 years, and you can file the refund applications with all the supporting documents. Yes, I'm clear. You can combine for 2 years. You can combine for multiple financial years. So here we are dealing with the transportations of goods from one place to the another, and transporter has carried all the required documents, including e-way bill and invoice. He has carried all the required documents, but due to some reasons, the e-way bill got expired. And also the department is raising that whatever the goods your classification you have given is not correct. So can the department detain the goods saying that it is expired? That is the first issue. The second is whether the check post officer has been given the power to contend saying that your HSN is not correct or your valuation is not correct. So I think this is what the practical we are seeing, that in day to day, a lot of goods are getting detained. They are issuing MOV 9 and they are saying that your e-way bill is expired, or certain data are incomplete, or your valuation is not correct, or there is undervaluations, your classification is not correct. So a lot of day-to-day issues we are facing pertaining to this e-way bill non-compliances. And I think we are just waiting for the further amendment, because that is more extended, more wider than what we had earlier in section 129, 130, because now they have made it very stringent. The penalties are going up to 200% of the taxes, and in case of and they have even given the option to the transporter to pay the taxes or pay this 1 lakh rupees and release his vehicle. So we are able to, and they can even file the appeal with, and if they have to file the appeal, they have to pay some 25% of the taxes. So I think now they are making it more stringent and more rigid sections under this 129 and 130. But anyway, from last 3 years experience, we are able to see that they are just detaining the goods and confiscating the goods. Like recently we had that when the goods were going for job work, and job work while returning the goods, he has not mentioned the value of goods which were there, because he's ultimately the job worker. So he has raised the invoice only to the extent of job work amount, and he has not incorporated the value of goods which were sent by principal to the job worker for doing a job work activity. So they have just confiscated the goods, they have just detained the goods, and they said you're liable for interest penalty. So I think day to day we are able to see this e-way bill is not complete, or wrong address is there, wrong number is there. There is a circular actually which is clarifying that if there is a certain clerical errors in your e-way bill, then in that case the department is not liable to levy the penalty. I think it is 69/2. But if you see a lot of pronouncement also, there are quite favorable decisions which has come stating that department cannot, the check post officer has not been given the power to look into the valuation aspect of the goods, or they are not given the power to look into the HSN classification of the goods. They're only going to look into the compliance of e-way bill along with the documents and whether the conditions are fulfilled for e-way bill. So they may, but if you see the day-to-day proceedings, they are raising on multiple issues actually, which may not be there within their purview of law, but that is what the litigations are more increasing pertaining to this e-way bill. So recently this decision, I think it has come very recently, the Satyam Shivam Papers Limited versus Assistant Commissioner. This is Telangana High Court, where the High Court has held that if the e-way bill is expired, you cannot say that there is a evasion of taxes. You cannot adjudicate under 74. And they have said that they cannot levy the penalty because there is no intention to evade the taxes. So ultimately, it is they have enclosed all other documents and they have not sold any such goods to any other party. So based on that, this decision looks to be little favorable. The Satyam Shivam papers, where they have said that if the e-way bill is expired, you cannot levy such a huge penalties. So I think something, if you look court-based law and this section-based law, it is little contradicting, but based on section 129 and 130, they are levying the penalty. So whether the HSN of goods is correct or not correct, I think this is going to have an impact, because you can just, because many times it happens that we have to pay taxes and then have to go for appeal, and if we have to go for appeal, we have to pay around 25% of these taxes. So I think many times we try to close the matter, or we try to see that we try to convince to the officer with the available documents, and we try to close issues. But I think these are going to become a day-to-day proceedings in our this compliances of this law actually. So you have to understand what is the section 129 and 130, what is their jurisdiction, what is their powers, and what are the non-compliances and compliances which they can look into for this e-way bill compliances. So please see that it is complied, because there is a huge implications of penalties for non-compliance of e-way bill, and even they can confiscate under 130. So they have to detain the goods, they'll seize the goods. So a lot of implications will be there. So even this is a procedural compliances, but it will have an implications of huge burden of taxes. And we are seeing that many cases are pending before the authorities. It is pending before Commissioner Appeals, and Commissioner Appeal has given a decision, but still there is a tribunal is not constituted under the GST law. So still the amount is just lying it with the department. So there are a lot of things which is happening in day-to-day pertaining to this e-way bill issues actually. So either, and many small registered person may not be afford to go to the high courts on all these issues. So I think we have to just look into this compliances, very strict basis, on a very system based, and it should be seen that because unnecessary there is a huge penalties compared to the erstwhile law. So, and they are going to make a amendment. So again, there will be a further implications. So I think with that perspective, just try to make out this case study, so that there are a lot of decisions I can say on this e-way bill, on lot of many things are there, but you have to just look into this aspect also. So I think this was my last case study which tried upon here. So whatever I was able to think on the different scenarios, I've just tried to add up in the today's sessions, which are in day to day. There are certain decisions which are pending. There are certain issues which are also pending before the courts. So, and there are certain amendments which are yet to be notified. So we have to wait and see how it is going to get implemented, how it is going to get amended, and we proceed accordingly. Yes. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, madam. Excellent presentation we had. So I think
you,
everyone enriched from these practical issues and case studies. We explained with examples. Really, definitely everyone enriched from these sessions. Thank you very much. Over to Divya to propose formal vote of thanks. Divya?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
please.
Thank you so much, sir. Members, I take this occurrence on behalf of Bangalore branch to propose formal vote of thanks for today's study circle. Wholehearted thanks on behalf of all the participants and on behalf of entire managing committee of Bangalore branch. To our speaker of today's program, C. Annapurna Kabra. Thank you so much, madam, once again, for spending your valuable time and giving an excellent presentation. Very delighted to listen to you every time. Thank you so much once again, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Dear
Thank you,
member,
all the
thank you so much, all
participants.
of you, for your active participation. Request all of you to kindly look into Bangalore branch website for further programs. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you,
night.
sir. Thank you, Chairman, sir. Good night.
Thank you. Bye. Good night.
Bye, sir.